The sanctity of human life is under assault. Find out how and what you can do about it in this edition of Life Matters with Brian Johnston, Western Regional Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on the right to life, on the culture that has emanated from the fact that our nation built itself on that basic truth, that there is a right to life. And the duty of the government is to protect your right to be alive and the right of every innocent person to be protected under the law. A very important principle. So a culture has emanated from that we've inherited, but now there's a battle of ideas. And as we've said many times on this program, you're engaged in a battle of ideas whether you know it or not. If you don't know it, if you don't recognize it, then you've already lost, because this culture, the media culture that surrounds you, is battling for your mind to give you a version of reality that you will adopt, that you will see as somehow true when in fact it's slightly skewed, particularly when it comes to this issue of the right to life. This is a very important program today. We're going to be talking about the year 2019, I think, for years to come. There's been several bills introduced in 2019 that are known as the heartbeat bills. And not all of them refer to the beating heart of the child, but all of them talk about the humanity of the child early on in life, in the womb. And you know what? If you've been listening to our program, you know that that's true. That's objectively true. But you have to go one step further. We have to recognize the nature of the laws. So there's many things that you believe and know to be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to put that into law, because you have to understand how the laws really work and how we as a nation have had to deal with absurd court decisions and overcome very difficult moral challenges as a nation. I think the very best parallel that you can possibly see was the Dred Scott decision and the legalization of slavery, really the cementing of the slavery worldview through that dreadful Dred Scott decision. We're going to talk about that decision, and to be honest, we're going to come back to what Roe versus Wade really is as we talk about the potential overturn of Roe v. Wade. You need to understand these ideas. You need to understand the role of the Supreme Court, because that was done violence with by Roe. Roe v. Wade actually violated the purpose of the Supreme Court. That was part of its problem. We're going to talk about that and why you don't want to get sucked into the same mentality that progressives and those who disregard the Constitution, they want to convince you that whoever controls the court can make up laws. If you think that once we have good people on the court that believe in the Constitution, they're not going to force pro-life laws on people, because the Constitution does not allow the Supreme Court to make up laws and force it on the states. That's what Roe v. Wade did. That's what Dred Scott did. And both of those decisions were violations of the Constitution and the principles on which the Supreme Court is built and why it's there. If you don't understand that, then you're just thinking like a liberal progressive who wants to control things and control people's lives through a supreme tribunal. And you've walked away from the Constitution. You've walked away from a democratic republic. You're basically advocating for absolutist control top down. I know that leftists do that. I know that pro-aborts do that. But they're not thinking right. They don't appreciate the Constitution. So we're going to talk about the Constitution, and specifically the Supreme Court decisions, and specifically how Roe will be overturned. We know that Roe will be overturned. We've made more than 100 of these programs. You can go back and you can see and listen to our discussions of why the right to life needs to be asserted. But most importantly, remember that we're in a battle of ideas. So it isn't just having the right ideas. It's a battle. How are you going to implement those ideas? I want to prepare you to understand why, particularly let's say the Georgia heartbeat bill, that's just one example, why it's not going to overturn Roe. And I don't want you to be alarmed at that. I want you to be prepared to understand the battle that we're in right now. So buckle your seatbelts. Right now you're going to hear a brief passage from MSNBC on these various bills that have come up. When I come back, we'll talk about what I believe are even better bills that they're not talking about. Remember, the mainstream media specializes in not telling you certain information and then slightly misguiding you on the information they do give you. It's kind of the pattern of misleading that the media has been in. But we're going to listen to these guys for a moment. This is MSNBC.
Tell us more about this Missouri legislation and how it compares to what we've been paying a lot of attention to in Alabama.
I think the way you've described it is right on the money. It's less restrictive than the Alabama one, which is basically a flat-out ban on abortion. This is up to 8 weeks, but they're both intended to do the same thing, which is to get the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Whether that's going to happen, of course, is an entirely different question.
So answer that question, though. I mean, we know that ultimately, and we've heard this in Alabama, that's the goal, to march up to the steps of the Supreme Court. Do you think they're going to get there?
You know, I think that's exactly the right metaphor, because I think that's what the sponsors of these bills think is going to happen, that these bills will get to the Supreme Court, and that's not necessarily true. There seems to be an air of inevitability around these laws, and they may get to the Supreme Court, but I think it's well to understand that they may not. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the most often cited reason the Supreme Court gives for agreeing to take a case, and remember, there's no automatic right of appeal to the Supreme Court. You get 2 bites at the apple. These laws are going to be challenged in the district courts, then they go to the Court of Appeals. After that, you have to ask the Supreme Court to take your case, and the number one reason the Supreme Court uses for that is if there is a split among the circuits. But the precedent of the Supreme Court is so well established that the district courts, and I would think the appeals courts too, are going to have to strike these laws down, and there won't be a split among the circuits. And the second issue is these laws may be their own worst enemy. They are such a blunt instrument inviting the Supreme Court to overturn Roe that the justices may prefer to stick with what is apparently the current plan, which is to, or at least what is happening currently, is that the court is willing to entertain state laws that would narrow access to abortion rather than outright repeal it. So just, hitting the Supreme Court with this question so quickly after Brett Kavanaugh came on the bench may not be the right strategy. And all I'm simply trying to say is I'm not saying it won't work. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that this feeling of the sponsors that, hooray, we get to go to the Supreme Court, it could turn out not to be true.
Life Matters continues after this.
They say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Did you know that California has a law in the books that says you need to protect babies born alive in the course of an abortion? But that law is simply ignored. The current legislature and Governor Newsom's administration support all abortions all the time. And they simply do not examine or regulate the practice, even though our tax dollars pay for it. We need to shine a light on this cover-up of the abortion industry in our state. Go to CaliforniaProLife.org and click on the Light of Day project. We need the facts about late-term abortion to be examined and made known. We need the government doing its job to protect lives. We need the light of day on this. Go to CaliforniaProLife.org.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Okay, well, that was an analysis from MSNBC, one of many that they've thrown out there. That was just a portion. But I want you to understand that they got it partly right. The way that you go to the Supreme Court is through a process. And all of these bills are going to be put into the lower courts immediately. They then have to go to the courts of appeal and to the circuit courts of appeal on the federal level. And there, to be perfectly honest, after those decisions, if you're going to appeal again, you appeal for a certiorari, you appeal to be accepted by the Supreme Court. Please hear our appeal of what the district court said. Well, it's very rare, and he was exactly right. It's very rare for the court to grant appeals. So these bills are just at the beginning. I want to tell you that there's some amazing bills that are already through that process that actually get much more effective traction, because the real goal of our opponents is to not let you see that child, not let you refer to that child. They just want to talk about the concept of having an abortion as a choice. They don't want you thinking about the human life that's taken. But there are several bills that do. And various states have passed bills about the pain-capable nature of that child in the womb and prohibiting abortion against a child that can feel pain. Or another bill, the dismemberment ban. Or in Indiana, a very intriguing bill having to do with performing abortion because the child is perceived to be a, quote, deformed child, specifically a Down syndrome child. These are very interesting bills because they get more precisely at the real problem of Roe. And that's what you want to do. And that's what you want to do when you talk to your friends and neighbors. Again, not just Joe Sixpack or Sally Soap Opera. I'm talking about the people at your church. There's people in your church that say they're pro-life, but they still don't fully understand either Roe v. Wade or Doe v. Bolton. They don't get the depths of what these decisions have done. When we come back, we're going to talk about why these other measures are in many ways more effective at taking down Roe. I believe Roe is going to go down, but then your work is going to begin. And I'm not kidding. Remember, this is a battle of ideas, and the Supreme Court is not going to do everything for you. What are you, some kind of commie leftist? You want a Supreme Tribunal to run your country? That's not how our Constitution is written. And if you buy into that, if you think, as I've heard some pro-life people say, well, when we get the court back, then we're going to ban all abortions. No, you're in the wrong country. You have the wrong understanding of government power. Our founders did not establish a court that does that. We're going to talk about what's going to happen when Roe v. Wade is overturned and why you need to be thinking it through in this battle of ideas. Because it's more than just having the right ideas, it's implementing them. That's our goal, to restore protection for those who cannot protect themselves. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to Life Matters.
You know about our car donation program at California Pro-Life. We use one of the most respected programs in the nation. Go to the California Pro-Life page, californiaprolife.org. Scroll to the bottom and click on Donate My Car. It's that easy. Did you know you can also donate any vehicle, boat, motorhome, or even personal property? If you are nearing retirement age, you can also get a tax deduction by earmarking a portion of your upcoming compulsory distributions from your 401k. Just email us for information. California Pro-Life is fighting to equip California pro-lifers with understanding and the tools to again protect the unborn and other vulnerable innocents. Thank you for your help in this battle. Go to californiaprolife.org. That's californiaprolife.org for more information.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Hey, well, welcome back. As I said before our break, we are going to talk now about Roe and why bills like the heartbeat bill aren't necessarily the best tool for dealing with Roe. Think about it just for a minute. Roe versus Wade did not permit abortion simply after the 6th week of pregnancy. That isn't what it did. In some ways, Roe versus Wade is a much bigger monster. It's the kind of monster that normal people, when they recognize what it really did, that normal people, untutored people, your neighbors. Polls show consistently that when asked, in California, yes, in California, one of the most liberal states, people who consider themselves pro-choice, actually, that support drops away for late-term abortion. But people don't talk about that poll. That individual may still consider themselves, quote, pro-choice, but they don't support late-term abortions. This is an important aspect of giving people an understanding of this debate. Your goal as a pro-life individual is not merely to be right and moral. Well, I'm right, and I'm moral, and I'm a Christian, and I think through these things philosophically, and I'm right. Our ultimate goal is not merely to be right, but help others to be right and to see what's right. That is actually the goal of Lincoln when you listen to his debates on slavery. Lincoln's goal was quite specific, to equip people to understand why slavery violated the principles of the Constitution. It was not an easy job, but an entire political party was birthed to do that. Abraham Lincoln specifically framed the purpose of the Republican Party. It was to use ballots and not bullets to change laws. Roe versus Wade does not somehow legalize in the first 2 trimesters or anything like that. It seems like it does, but merely what Justice Blackmun did, and again, please understand what Roe and Doe did and what they're doing. If you can't explain it, don't expect some other person to explain it. If you're pro-life, you have to understand this. Roe simply said, we don't know when life begins. And at that point, there's no more consideration given to that child. That child has no legal standing or recognition under Roe v. Wade. Justice Blackmun then created the trimester system. In fact, he literally created the abortion clinic. He said abortions in the first trimester can be done in freestanding facilities. And they don't necessarily have to be like a doctor's office. Oh, first trimester is easy stuff. Second trimester should be in a doctor's office. And third trimester should be in a more medically appropriate surroundings. That's what it said about trimesters. The child is not recognized in any way, shape, or form. Now, Doe v. Bolton. Please, if you are not familiar with Doe v. Bolton, then you're not really a very good pro-lifer. Because Doe v. Bolton came down the same day as Roe versus Wade. It's a companion decision. They work hand in hand. And some people say, well, that provides for the life of the mother. No. But the reason Doe is significant, it talks about the health of the mother. And the health of the mother is worded so bizarrely freely, it's almost unbelievable that it would be worded this way. But let me read it to you. So in Doe v. Bolton, Justice Blackmun, who also had written Roe, had declared in Roe that the baby doesn't exist. Yeah, I know. He just talks about the pregnancy. Let's deal with this pregnancy. But the child doesn't exist at all under Roe because he said, we just don't know when life begins. That was his thinking. He said that science doesn't know. Well, that was known as a lie. And you might know a lot of lawyers. Some people use their vowels differently and refer to them as lawyers, the ability to stretch truth over anything they want or make it sound true. But that is clearly untrue. Science has known about the beginnings of life for a long time, at least back to the invention of the modern microscope in 1836. But it's a lie. And the average child could tell you that life is clearly present and demonstrably present in the womb. So Justice Blackmun lied. But he lies again about the nature of caring for a woman's life because he didn't use that term. He talked about the doctor's decision regarding the health of the mother in all 3 trimesters. So the health provision applies across the board of these arbitrary trimesters, which Blackmun actually created, the trimester system, and is now used medically, but he actually established that regimen of trimestering it. And specifically then, what Justice Blackmun does about the health of the mother. And he instructs I'm going to call them a physician, but you need to know to do what they're doing, they violate the physician's code. So it might be better to say the perpetrator, the individual hired to kill this child, which sometimes we call them the doctor. They often have an MD after their name. But the medical judgment of the doctor, again, the person hired to kill the child, is the final arbiter. And he says that the medical judgment may be exercised in the light of all factors: physical, emotional, psychological, familial, and the woman's age, relevant to the well-being of the patient. All these factors may relate to health. Close quote. So Justice Blackmun, while supposedly putting limits on abortion, clearly says that it is the decision of the arbiter, the performer of the abortion. And this is why radical feminists, by the way, get offended. Because it's the abortionist that determines, well, I think her well-being might be affected by this. Her present well-being, but also her future well-being. And he being Blackmun, empowers the abortionist to make that determination. And feminists find this to be rather paternalistic. Now, you may be aware, and I'm sure if you can picture the situation, because I know of people that have gotten up from the the abortionist table, a lot of times the woman isn't quite sure she wants to go through with it. So Blackmun says, no, the abortionist decides if she needs to go through with it. That's what the health of the mother explicitly states. That's what the Roe regimen is about. The child has no rights, and the life of the mother is not, even though that's offered so often. No, it's the health of the mother, but it's about the well-being as determined by the perpetrator, the guy getting paid to end that life. It's a very serious decision. That's how far it goes. So this isn't about legalizing abortion at 6 weeks. And unfortunately, your neighbors, if they think that's what Roe is about, and a lot of them do, don't let them think that. Make sure you understand and that you help them understand just how radical Roe is and why it must be overturned. As I said, it's not just the disregard for human life. And again, these are kids big enough to hold in your arms, kids that when they survive, very often, the physician, and I know one that is trying to stop this and fighting hard, an MD, Dr. Pat Marmion, he says what happens during this dreaded complication is that the doctor ignores the child because if there's any attention given, now they're responsible. But what they do, if the child is born alive, they abandon the child. That's typically how it's done. So if the child's in a bucket, sometimes there's instructions that they be left face down in a bucket of blood. And I know of individuals that have survived that because of a brave nurse that rescued that child. So the goal is to kill the child throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. That's what Roe and Doe do. Make sure that you understand that. If somebody says, oh, no, it's if there's a deformity of the child, well, you know what? If you feel better for killing the baby because they're quote unquote deformed, well, okay, they'll let you use that argument. It's kind of a Nazi argument, but the law doesn't say anything about that. The law doesn't say, well, you can kill the child if it's deformed or if there's a disability. The law doesn't say that. The law does not recognize that child's life at all. So if you want to come up with some reason to make you feel better about killing that baby, that's great. But don't pretend that the law says that. And in terms of the life of the mother, also know this, and any honest OBG will tell you this immediately. If you're dealing with a late-term situation and a mother's life is in danger, the safest way to save that mother's life is through a cesarean section. Because you can save that woman's life without complications. You can actually, by doing that, it's been used literally for centuries, as the name suggests. But it also saves the child life. And now, if you want to abort the child, now it's really complicated because that kid's clearly alive. Now you got to kill it by some other means. And some abortionists have actually abandoned children after a C-section, but it's usually through intentional abandonment because otherwise, when they get really physical, like snipping the spine, as you have probably heard Dr. Gosnell did, that makes it a little bit more tenuous, and Roe does not protect that. But Roe has allowed for the killing of a child throughout pregnancy, and very often, if there is that complication, then the child's abandoned, and that abortionist is hoping the kid just dies because that's the goal all along. You need to understand what Roe and Doe have done to our nation because, as I said, it isn't just the human life. They forced every state. They were supposed to be considering the laws of Texas and the laws of Georgia. Roe is a Texas case. Georgia had the case of Doe v. Bolton. They combined those decisions on January 22nd, 73, and they said every state must abide by this ruling. They became a supreme tribunal, the most powerful legal tribunal in the land, and they created a new law and superimposed it on all states. They violated the Constitution, just as Dred Scott did. I do want to go back and remind you, if you want to see babies protected again, you're going to have to do what the original Republican Party did. And I remind my Republican Party friends, the Republican Party was built on creating and ensuring that there are laws that protect the innocent. That's the foundation of the Republican Party, and to do it through the political process. That was the great threat of the Republican Party to the pro-choicers of that time. Again, if you want to have more information on this and really study the history of slavery, study what Lincoln said about slavery. Go to the Cooper's Union debate. Rather, it was a speech he gave at Cooper's Union. But then during the Lincoln-Douglas debates as well, I would say particularly the Alton, Illinois debate, read what he says about his plan to end slavery using the civic process, not using the Supreme Court. What he should have done, why didn't he say, if you think the way a lot of these people are thinking now, well, let's just, Dred Scott cemented the slavery issue. Well, I'm going to make sure the Supreme Court reverses that and cements the anti-slavery side. No, that is not what Lincoln did. He believes in government of, by, and for the people. He wanted people to understand why slavery was an evil and get them to vote on it, because that's the nature of our republic, is that we make laws of, by, and for the people. But if you're not equipped to understand that, how can your neighbors be equipped to understand why these laws should be dealt with properly, why Roe should be overturned, and why the state should be free to protect children again? You've got to understand that. So here we are. We're at an amazing moment in American history. It's the battle of ideas in the civic process. So if you're still stuck thinking, well, this is about my faith and this is about my religion, abortion's wrong, and I'm just going to say it's wrong and that's right, that I'm done with it, you don't understand the battle you're in. You're invited to participate as an American citizen in standing for what's right, in using the civic process, making sure that you vote and your friends vote for people who will use the law to protect the innocent again. And then understand on the larger issue what Roe is, how it will be brought down. I believe one of these bills that actually cut at the expansive nature of Roe, once that balloon is popped, then the states can start doing what they've always done, protecting people within their limits. And then Congress can act. But Roe must be overturned first. And for it to be overturned, people must understand what it's done that allows killing a child for any reason at any time, or for no reason in particular, just for choice. That's what choice means. The feminists actually want Roe overturned so that they can have a new law that allows, not on the basis of privacy, but on the basis of choice, because only women can have babies, then only women should decide if they can kill that baby. So they want it based not on privacy. They want a right to abortion based on gender, on sex. So this is a huge battle. Be ready for this battle. Be ready to bring an answer when people ask you why Roe is wrong. Make sure you can explain so that they understand about babies big enough to hold in your arms that are killed. It legalizes not just at 6 weeks, it has forced every state to accept abortion up to 32 weeks and beyond. Your neighbors really don't believe in that. The vast majority of Americans don't believe in that. So explain it to them so they can join you in disagreeing with Roe v. Wade being the law of the land. Help them out. Thanks for listening.
Learn more about everything in today's show online at lifematters.life. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.